The river woke before the sun. It whispered softly against the wooden posts along the shore, rolling and stretching like a living thing shaking off sleep. Mist floated above the water, thin and silver, blurring the line between sky and river until everything felt quiet and unreal. That was when Ao began her day. She stood at the edge of the bank, barefoot on damp earth, tying the last knot on her fishing net. Her clothes were old and torn, patched so many times that the original color was hard to tell. They hung loosely on her strong frame, darkened by years of water, sun, and effort. To anyone passing by, she looked rough, maybe even frightening, but to the river she belonged. At 25 years old, Ao was unlike any woman in the town. Her arms were thick with muscle, shaped by years of pulling heavy nets and lifting crates of fish heavier than her own body weight. Her shoulders were broad. Her back was straight. There was nothing fragile about her appearance. And yet, there was something quiet in her eyes. She lifted the canoe with practiced ease, pushing it into the shallow water. The wood groaned softly, as if greeting her. She stepped in, steady and balanced, and picked up her paddle. With strong, controlled strokes, she guided the canoe into the river as the first light of dawn painted the sky pale pink. Ao fished alone, not because she wanted to, but because she always had. People said she was too strong for a woman, too silent, too different. Some whispered that she was cursed, others that she had chosen a man's life. Children stared at her muscles with wide eyes. Grown men watched her with a mix of admiration and discomfort. No one ever offered to help, and Ao never asked. The river had taught her early that survival didn't wait for kindness. She remembered being small once. Skinny arms, scraped knees, fingers always cold. She remembered standing at this same riverbank years ago, watching the water with fear instead of familiarity. That was before the river became her home, before it became her parent. Her mother's face came to her sometimes in pieces, warm hands, a soft voice, the smell of clean clothes. Her father's laugh, deep and gentle. Those memories faded slowly after they were gone, slipping away like water through fingers no matter how tightly she tried to hold on. After that, there had been hunger, long days, longer nights. Fishing wasn't a dream she chose. It was a door that opened when all others were closed. The first time she pulled a net from the water, it almost dragged her in with it. She had fallen backward, gasping, arms shaking as the weight burned through her muscles. People had laughed then, but she got back up. The second time, she held on longer. The third time, she pulled the net in, and she never let go again. Now, years later, the net slid smoothly through her hands as she cast it into the water. She waited, watching the ripples spread outward. The silence didn't feel lonely, felt honest. When she pulled the net back, it was heavy, very heavy. Her muscles tightened as she leaned back, bracing her feet against the canoe. The rope bit into her palms, rough and familiar. Her arms strained, veins rising beneath her skin, but she didn't stop. The net broke the surface, silver shapes flashing wildly inside it. Fish, big ones. Ao exhaled slowly, a small smile touching her lips. Not joy exactly, more like relief. Food meant survival. Survival meant one more day won. She secured the net and continued working as the sun climbed higher, her movements efficient and sure. Sweat formed along her temples, sliding down her neck, but she didn't wipe it away. Her body knew this rhythm. It welcomed the effort. By the time she returned to shore, the town was awake. People gathered near the market area, voices overlapping, footsteps stirring dust into the air. Ao lifted the crates of fish from the canoe and carried them toward the stalls without waiting for help. Each step was steady, deliberate. Eyes followed her, some curious, some judgmental, some respectful. She felt all of them and ignored them all. A group of teenage girls whispered as she passed. One of them laughed nervously. "She's stronger than my brother," someone muttered. Ao kept walking. She set her fish down and began sorting them, her hands moving quickly. A merchant approached, inspecting the catch. "These are good," he said, surprised. "You did this alone?" Ao nodded. He hesitated, then named a price lower than he should have. She didn't argue. Arguing took energy. And energy was something she had learned to spend carefully. When the fish were sold, Ao tied the small amount of money into the corner of her cloth and turned back toward the river. She didn't linger. The market was loud, crowded, too many eyes. The river didn't stare. As she walked, she passed a group of boys wrestling and laughing near the water's edge. One of them slipped and cried out when he scraped his arm. Ao paused. She walked over, crouched, and examined the cut. Without a word, she tore a clean strip from the inside of her cloth, wrapped it gently around the boy's arm, and tied it. The boy stared at her, eyes wide. "Thank you," he whispered. Ao nodded once and walked away. She didn't see the way the boy smiled after she left. Back at the riverbank, she sat on a smooth rock and let her feet dip into the cool water. The river moved around her ankles, familiar and calm. Sometimes, in moments like this, a different kind of ache settled in her chest. Not hunger, not exhaustion, loneliness. She watched couples walking past in the distance, friends laughing together, families sharing food. She wondered quietly, briefly, what it would be like to be seen as something other than strong. What it would be like to be held without being measured. She shook her head, pushing the thought away. Dreams were dangerous. She had learned that the hard way. Ao stood, wiped her hands on her clothes, and prepared to leave when she felt it. An unfamiliar presence. Not loud, not threatening, just different. She glanced up. A man stood a short distance away, watching the river. He was tall, dressed simply, nothing about him screaming importance. Yet there was something calm about the way he stood, like he wasn't trying to impress anyone. His gaze followed the water, then shifted, slowly, until it met hers. Their eyes locked. Ao felt something tighten inside her chest. Not fear, curiosity. He didn't look away first. Neither did she. For a moment, the river flowed between them, quiet and endless. Then Ao turned, picked up her things, and walked past him without a word. She didn't know his name. She didn't know his world. She didn't know that the river, which had raised her and shaped her strength, was about to carry something new into her life. Something she never planned for. Something called love. Ethan Cole had learned how to smile without feeling anything. It was a skill he mastered early. Standing in boardrooms filled with glass walls and silent tension. Shaking hands with people who measured his worth in numbers and power. Cameras loved him. Investors trusted him. Magazines called him a visionary. But none of them knew how heavy his chest felt when the lights went off. On the morning his private jet touched down near the coast, Ethan stared out the window and felt nothing but exhaustion. The world below looked peaceful. Wide water, open sky, places where time seemed slower. It was exactly why he had come. He wasn't running from failure. He was running from noise. For years, his life had been scheduled down to the minute. Meetings, deals, dinners with people who laughed too loudly and listened too little. Women who leaned in close, eyes sparkling. Not at him, but at what he represented. Every conversation felt like a transaction. So when his assistant suggested a short retreat near a quiet riverside town, Ethan agreed without thinking. No cameras, no interviews, just air, water, and space. The yacht anchored early that morning. Ethan stepped onto the deck, the smell of water and salt filling his lungs. He loosened the collar of his shirt and exhaled slowly. For the first time in a long while, no one was calling his name. He told the crew he wanted to walk alone. They hesitated, of course, but he insisted. On land, the town was already stirring. Simple sounds surrounded him. Footsteps on sand, distant voices, the splash of water against wood. No one recognized him. No one stared. He liked that. He followed the sound of the river, letting it guide him. The path led him toward the water's edge, where mist still hovered low. That was when he saw movement, strong, controlled, purposeful. Canoe, and a woman standing in it. At first, Ethan thought he was imagining things. She stood tall, feet planted wide for balance, muscles tense as she pulled a heavy net from the river. The water resisted, but she resisted harder. Her arms flexed as she leaned back, jaw set, eyes focused. The net burst from the water, heavy with fish. Ethan stopped walking. He forgot to breathe. He had seen strength before, in gyms, in athletes, in polished images on screens. But this was different. This was not strength on display. This was strength in use. The woman didn't celebrate. She didn't smile. She simply secured the net and moved on, like the weight meant nothing. Her clothes were torn and worn, clinging to her frame. Her skin glistened with sweat and water, catching the light of the rising sun. She was beautiful in a way Ethan had never learned to name. Not delicate, not perfect, real. He stood there longer than he meant to, watching her work. The river seemed to respond to her, flowing around her canoe like it recognized her presence. When she finally turned toward the shore, Ethan realized his heart was beating faster. He stepped back instinctively, suddenly aware of how close he was. She didn't look at him, not once. That unsettled him more than he expected. Most people noticed Ethan. Even when they didn't know his name, they felt something. His posture, his confidence, the quiet authority he carried. But this woman walked past him as if he were nothing more than air. He watched her carry crates of fish alone, her back straight, her steps steady. No one helped her. No one offered. Something inside him tightened. Later that day, Ethan couldn't focus. He sat on the deck of the yacht with a glass of water untouched in his hand, his thoughts drifting back to the river, to the woman, to the way she worked without asking permission from the world. That night he barely slept. By morning he knew he would go back. He told himself it was curiosity, nothing more. The second day he arrived earlier. The river was quieter, the air cooler. He spotted her almost immediately, already at work, already moving with that same determined rhythm. This time he stayed where she could see him. She noticed. Her eyes lifted briefly, sharp and observant. They met his for half a second. Then she looked away. Ethan swallowed. He didn't know why that simple dismissal affected him so deeply. When she finished pulling in her net, he spoke without thinking. "You fish alone?" His voice sounded strange to his own ears, uncertain. She paused, turned slowly, and looked at him fully this time. Her eyes were dark and steady, holding no fear, no interest, no invitation. "The river doesn't argue," she said. "It listens." Ethan blinked. Then he smiled. "I suppose that makes sense." She didn't smile back. Instead, she returned to her work, conversation clearly over. Ethan stood there, feeling oddly foolish and oddly alive. He came back the next day, and the next. Sometimes he spoke. Sometimes he didn't. He asked small questions. She answered some, ignored others. He learned her name was Ao. He learned she had fished this river for years. He learned she didn't like unnecessary words. She learned he was called Ethan, that he worked in business, that he asked questions like someone who had spent too much time being listened to and not enough time listening. Still, something changed. She began to acknowledge him with brief nods. Sometimes she spoke without being asked. He found himself looking forward to those moments more than he wanted to admit. People noticed. Whispers followed him. Why is he always there? What does he want from her? Someone like him doesn't belong here. Ao heard them too. She felt their eyes, their curiosity, their judgment. She didn't confront him. But one evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the river gold, she finally spoke. "You don't look like you belong here," she said quietly. Ethan considered lying. Instead, he told the truth, at least part of it. "I needed somewhere quiet," he said. "Somewhere honest." She studied him for a long moment. "This place isn't gentle," she replied. "It doesn't pretend." "I don't want pretending," he said. For the first time, Ao looked at him differently. Not dismissive, not guarded. Just thoughtful. Something unspoken settled between them. That night, as Ethan walked back to the yacht, his chest felt lighter than it had in years. He didn't know why this river, this town, or this woman mattered so much to him already. But he knew one thing. He wasn't here to escape anymore. He was here because, for the first time in a long time, Someone looked at him and saw nothing worth taking. And that made him want to stay. By the 5th morning, the river no longer felt like a place Ethan merely visited. It felt like somewhere he belonged. The sun was barely awake when he arrived, the sky pale and quiet, the water smooth except for gentle ripples near the shore. He stood at his usual spot, hands in his pockets, breathing in the cool air. There was no rush in his chest today. No buzzing phone. No voices demanding decisions. Only the river. And her. Ao was already there. She stood in her canoe, adjusting her net, muscles moving easily beneath her worn clothes. Ethan watched the way she worked. Focused, steady, completely present. She did not rush. She did not hesitate. Every movement had a purpose. He admired that more than he could explain. She noticed him as she always did now. She didn't look surprised anymore, just curious in her quiet way. "You're early," she said without looking at him. Ethan smiled. "I didn't want to miss the morning." She glanced at him briefly. "The river doesn't wait for anyone." "I'm learning that," he replied. She pushed her canoe farther into the water and began casting her net. Ethan sat on a nearby rock, close enough to talk but far enough not to interrupt her rhythm. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt comfortable now, like an understanding that didn't need words. As the sun rose higher, Ao pulled in her net, straining slightly under its weight. Ethan stood without thinking. "Do you want help?" he asked. She paused. Slowly, she turned toward him, studying his arms, his hands. Hands that had likely never pulled a net from a river or carried a crate heavier than a briefcase. "No," she said simply. "But thank you." Ethan nodded, embarrassed but not offended. He sat back down, watching as she completed the task on her own. Something about her independence humbled him. When she was done, she rested for a moment, sitting at the edge of the canoe with her feet in the water. Ethan noticed the faint lines on her palms, the scars that told stories she had never spoken aloud. "You don't ask many questions," he said. Ao shrugged. "Questions don't feed me." "That sounds lonely," he said gently. She looked at him then, really looked at him. "Lonely is waiting for people who never come," she replied. "This," she gestured to the river, "is enough." Ethan didn't argue. He had waited for people too, just not in the same way. Later that morning, as Ao prepared to head toward the market, Ethan followed at a distance. He didn't want to intrude, but something pulled him along. He watched as people reacted to her, how they stared, whispered, and stepped aside. He saw it all now, the way some people looked at her with discomfort, the way others treated her strength like a strange thing, the way no one offered help, even when she clearly carried more than her share. When she set her crates down, a merchant inspected the fish and named a price quickly. Too quickly. Ethan frowned. "That's not fair," he said before he could stop himself. The merchant stiffened. "Excuse me? These fish are worth more than that," Ethan said calmly. Ao turned sharply, her eyes flashing. "It's fine," she said to Ethan, her voice low. "I didn't ask for help." The merchant scoffed and adjusted the price slightly, clearly annoyed. Ao took the money without comment, tied it away, and walked off. Ethan followed her toward the riverbank again. "You shouldn't let them do that," he said. She stopped walking. For a moment, Ethan thought she might be angry. Instead, she looked tired. "You think I don't know?" she asked quietly. "You think I don't feel it?" Ethan swallowed. "I didn't mean. I don't need saving," she continued. "I need respect, and that doesn't come from arguing with people who already decided who I am." Her words hit him harder than any accusation could have. "I'm sorry," he said honestly. "I overstepped." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "You meant well." That was enough. That afternoon, they sat by the river longer than usual. Ethan told her small things about himself, how he grew up always trying to prove something, how silence used to scare him, how he never learned how to stop working. Ao listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "You talk like someone who never had time to breathe." He smiled sadly. "That's exactly it." She skipped a small stone across the water. Breathing is important. I'm starting to understand that, he said, watching the stone disappear. As the days passed, their routines began to overlap naturally. Ethan learned when to speak and when to stay quiet. Ao learned that he wasn't trying to change her. Sometimes they laughed, softly, carefully, like people afraid the moment might break if they held it too tightly. One evening, as the sky turned orange and purple, a group of men passed by and laughed openly. "She works like a man," one said loudly. "Who would want a woman built like that?" another added. Ao's shoulders stiffened. Ethan stood up. "That's enough," he said, his voice firm. The men stopped, surprised. "She didn't do anything to you," Ethan continued. "Leave her alone." Ao turned to him sharply. "Ethan." The men scoffed and walked away, muttering. Silence fell. "You shouldn't do that," Ao said quietly. "They'll talk." "They already are," Ethan replied. "I won't stand by and listen." She looked at him, conflict clear in her eyes. "I don't need a defender," she said. "I know," he said softly. "I just didn't want you to feel alone." That word, alone, hung between them. Ao turned away, staring at the river. "I learned a long time ago how to stand by myself." "I believe you," Ethan said. "But even the strongest people deserve someone beside them." Her throat tightened. She said nothing. That night, long after they parted ways, Ao lay awake listening to the distant sound of water. She thought about the way Ethan looked at her. Not with pity, not with fear, not with hunger, but with admiration. It frightened her. Ethan, too, couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling of his cabin, replaying her words, her expressions, the way her strength seemed to come from something deeper than muscle. He realized then that his feelings were no longer simple curiosity. They were dangerous, because he didn't just admire Ao. He respected her. And respect, he knew, was the doorway to something that could change everything. By the time the sun rose the next morning, both of them understood one quiet truth. Their worlds had already collided, and neither of them was walking away unchanged. The sky changed its mind that afternoon. It began with a silence so sudden it felt wrong. The birds disappeared. The breeze that usually danced across the river stopped moving, leaving the water unnaturally still, flat like a held breath. Ao noticed first. She stood at the edge of the canoe, squinting at the horizon. The clouds were piling up fast, dark and heavy, folding into one another like bruises forming in the sky. "This isn't good," she murmured. Ethan, who was sitting on a rock nearby, looked up. "Storm." "Yes," she said, "and not a patient one." She began pulling her canoe closer to shore, her movements quick and precise. The river was her teacher, and it had taught her when to work and when to leave. Today was the day to leave. Ethan stood. "Should I help?" "Stay back," she said firmly. "Wet rocks are dangerous." He obeyed, though every part of him wanted to ignore her and rush forward. The first drop of rain hit the water like a warning. Then another. Then dozens. Within seconds, the rain fell hard and fast, drumming against the river's surface and soaking the ground beneath their feet. Wind whipped through the air, bending the tall grasses along the shore. The canoe rocked violently as Ao struggled to secure it. "Ao!" Ethan shouted over the growing roar of the storm. She waved him off, bracing herself as a sudden wave slammed against the canoe. The rope slipped from her grasp for half a second, just long enough for the current to grab hold. The canoe jerked. Ao stumbled. Ethan's heart slammed into his chest. She regained her footing quickly, muscles tightening as she fought the pull of the river. But the rain was relentless now, the wind howling as if the sky itself was angry. "Leave it," Ethan shouted. "Come back." She hesitated. That hesitation cost them both. A powerful gust of wind knocked Ethan off balance. His foot slipped on the wet rock, and before he could catch himself, the ground vanished beneath him. He fell into the river. The cold hit him first, then the weight. The river swallowed him whole, pulling him under with a strength he was completely unprepared for. Water filled his mouth as he thrashed, panic exploding in his chest. He tried to swim, but the current dragged him sideways, spinning him until he couldn't tell which way was up. His lungs burned, his thoughts scattered, and for the first time in his life, Ethan Cole felt truly powerless. "Ayo!" He tried to shout, but the river stole the sound. Ao turned just in time to see him disappear beneath the surface. Her body moved before her mind could catch up. She dove in. The water was freezing, violent, alive. The current slammed against her chest, but she pushed through it, muscles screaming as she fought her way toward him. She spotted his arm breaking the surface for a split second before it vanished again. "I've got you," she whispered fiercely, though he couldn't hear her. She plunged deeper, her hand closing around his collar. He was heavier than he looked, dead weight fighting against her grip, but she wrapped one arm around his chest and kicked upward with everything she had. The river resisted. It always did. But Ao had learned long ago that the river respected strength that refused to give up. She broke the surface with a gasp, hauling Ethan toward the shore inch by inch. Her arms burned. Her lungs ached. Rain blurred her vision. But she didn't stop. When her knees finally hit shallow ground, she dragged him out of the water and collapsed beside him, chest heaving. Ethan coughed violently, water spilling from his mouth as he struggled to breathe. Ao rolled him onto his side, steady hands rubbing his back. "Breathe," she said, her voice firm but shaking. "You're okay. I've got you." He coughed again, then sucked in a sharp breath. His body trembled, soaked and cold, but alive. Ao stayed right there, holding him upright against her chest as the rain continued to pour. She wrapped her arms around him instinctively, shielding him from the wind, grounding him with her strength. Slowly, his breathing evened out. When he finally looked up at her, his eyes were wide. Not with fear now, but with something deeper. "Oh, you saved me," he said hoarsely. She nodded once. "The river almost didn't give you back." They sat there for a long moment, rain soaking them both, thunder rumbling in the distance. The storm began to ease, the anger in the sky slowly burning itself out. Ethan's hands were shaking, not from the cold alone. "I would have drowned," he said quietly. "Yes," Ao replied, "you would have." He laughed weakly, then stopped, overwhelmed by the truth of it. When the rain softened to a drizzle, they moved under a large tree near the shore. Ao wrung out her clothes and checked Ethan carefully. His arms, his head, his breathing, making sure he was truly all right. "You shouldn't come near the river in weather like that," she said. "It doesn't care who you are." Ethan looked at her, water dripping from his hair. "I'm starting to understand that." They sat in silence as the storm faded, the river calming again as if nothing had happened. It was then that Ethan spoke. "There's something I need to tell you." Ao tensed slightly. "If it's about the storm." "It's not," he said. "It's about me." She waited. He took a breath, steadying himself. "I didn't come here just to rest. I came here to disappear for a while." She said nothing. "I run a company," he continued. "Several, actually. I'm a very wealthy." Ao's expression didn't change. "I'm a billionaire," he said quietly. The word hung between them. Rainwater dripped from the leaves above. The river flowed on, unconcerned. Ao studied his face, really studied it. She searched for pride, for fear, for expectation. She found none. She stood up slowly, brushed sand from her clothes, and met his eyes. "That doesn't matter," she said. Ethan blinked. "It doesn't. You still fell into the river," she replied calmly. "You still needed help. Money doesn't make you float." Something in his chest cracked open. "I didn't tell you so you'd look at me differently," he said. "I just didn't want to lie anymore." She nodded. "Good." Then she surprised him. She held out her hand. Not in awe. Not in gratitude. Not in submission. Just human. He took it, standing slowly. For a brief moment, they stood close. Close enough that Ethan could feel the strength in her body, the steadiness in her presence. Close enough that Ao could feel his heartbeat, still racing but real. You should go back to your boat, she said softly. You'll get sick if you stay wet. And you? He asked. She glanced at the river. The river and I understand each other. He hesitated. Thank you for saving my life. She met his gaze, her eyes serious. Don't waste it. As Ethan walked away, something inside him shifted permanently. He had faced danger before. Business risks, public failure, financial loss. But none of it compared to the helplessness he had felt beneath the water. And none of it compared to the power of the woman who pulled him out. Ao watched him go, her heart pounding for reasons she didn't fully understand. The storm had passed, but something far more powerful had begun. After the storm, nothing felt the same. The river still flowed as it always had. The canoe still creaked when Ao pushed it into the water each morning. The fish still filled her nets, heavy and alive. On the surface, her life looked unchanged. But inside her, something had shifted. She noticed it in the quiet moments, when she sat on the riverbank and found herself listening for footsteps that weren't there yet. When she worked and caught herself wondering if Ethan would appear, hands in his pockets, eyes calm and curious. When the memory of his heartbeat against her chest during the storm returned without warning and made her throat tighten. She didn't like it. Feelings were distractions. Feelings made people careless. And Ao had survived too long by being careful. Ethan, on the other hand, was no longer pretending nothing had happened. The day after the storm, he returned to the river later than usual, moving cautiously, as if the water itself had earned his respect. He stayed farther back, watching the current with a seriousness Ao had never seen in him before. You don't have to come every day, she said without turning. I know, he replied, but I want to. She glanced at him. His clothes were dry and clean, but his eyes held something unsettled. Gratitude, yes, but also something deeper, something that made her uneasy. Word of the storm spread quickly. People talked. They say she pulled him out like he was nothing. That man would be dead if not for her. Who is he, really? The questions followed them everywhere. When Ethan walked through the town now, eyes lingered. Some people nodded politely. Others stared openly. A few whispered behind their hands, their curiosity sharpening into suspicion. Ao felt the change more sharply. People who once ignored her now watched her closely. Some smiled too brightly. Others frowned, as if she had stepped out of her place without permission. At the market, a woman muttered loudly, "That's her. The one with the rich man." Ao's hands tightened around the crate of fish. Ethan heard it too. He stepped forward instinctively, but Ao shook her head. "Don't," she said quietly. "Please." He stopped. Later, when they sat by the river, he spoke carefully. "They're talking." She nodded. "They always do. But this is different," he said. "They're judging you because of me." She finally turned to face him, her expression firm. "No, they're judging me because I exist." That silenced him. Still, the pressure grew. One afternoon, as Ao prepared to leave the river, a man approached Ethan openly. His tone was polite, but his eyes were sharp. "You seem very interested in this place," the man said. "And in her." Ethan straightened. "She's my friend." The man smiled thinly. "Be careful. People like you don't stay long. But people like her are left behind." Ao heard every word. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her small shelter. The river murmured in the distance, steady and familiar. She had lived her whole life being underestimated, ignored, pushed aside. She had learned how to survive that. But this was different, because now there was something to lose. The next day, Ethan arrived carrying a bag. He looked nervous, almost unsure of himself. "I brought you something," he said. Ao frowned slightly. "I didn't ask for anything." "I know," he said quickly. "It's not expensive." He handed her the bag. Inside was a pair of thick gloves, new, sturdy, meant for hard work. "I noticed the rope cuts your hands sometimes," he said softly. "I thought these might help." Ao stared at the gloves. They weren't flashy. They weren't unnecessary. They were practical, thoughtful. Her chest tightened. "Thank you," she said quietly. Their fingers brushed as she took them, and the small contact sent a shock through her that she wasn't prepared for. She pulled her hand back quickly. Ethan noticed. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked. She hesitated, then spoke the truth. "You're making this harder." He swallowed. "How?" "By being kind," she said. "By staying. By looking at me like I matter." "You do matter," he said immediately. "That's the problem," she replied. He didn't understand at first. "Ao, my life is simple," she continued, her voice steady but strained. "I work, eat, I survive. I don't build things that can be taken from me." Ethan stepped closer. "I'm not trying to take anything away. But your world will," she said. "People like you don't stay in places like this. And when you leave, everything you touched becomes fragile." Her words landed heavily between them. Ethan looked at her with something like pain. "You think I'll just disappear?" "I think you'll be called back," she said. "And I'll still be here." That evening, a sleek car arrived in town. Ao saw it from the riverbank, too polished, too out of place. Two men stepped out, dressed sharply, scanning the area until they spotted Ethan. They approached him with urgency. "We've been trying to reach you," one said. "The board is waiting. There's a situation." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I told you I was taking time off." "This can't wait," the other replied. "You're needed." Ao watched from a distance as Ethan spoke quietly with them. She didn't hear the words, but she didn't need to. She understood. When he finally walked toward her, his face was conflicted. "I have to leave for a bit," he said. "Just temporarily." She nodded. "I know. I'll come back," he said quickly. "I promise." She looked at him, really looked at him. At the man who had nearly drowned, who had looked at her with respect instead of judgment, who had stirred something in her she never planned for. "I don't want promises," she said softly. "I want truth." "The truth is," he said, voice thick, "I don't want to leave." "But you will," she replied. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Ao stepped back. "Go. Handle your world." He reached for her hand, then stopped himself, unsure. "Be careful," she said. "Cities are more dangerous than rivers." A sad smile touched his lips. "I think I'm starting to believe that." The car drove away, carrying Ethan with it. The river swallowed the sound. Days passed, then weeks. Ethan sent messages when he could, short, sincere, full of longing. Elle read them all. She never replied, not because she didn't care, but because caring was beginning to hurt. People's whispers grew sharper. She thought she could keep him. She forgot who she was. "He's gone now." One morning, Ao stood by the river longer than usual. She looked at the water, at the canoe, at the place that had always held her steady. She realized something with aching clarity. If she stayed, she would keep waiting. Waiting for footsteps. Waiting for promises. Waiting for a world that was never built for her. And she refused to become someone who waited. That afternoon, Ao packed her few belongings. She loaded her canoe with her nets and supplies and pushed it into the river without looking back. She was not running from love. She was protecting herself from being broken by it. Far away, in a glass-walled office filled with tension and noise, Ethan felt it. A sudden, sharp emptiness he couldn't explain. He looked out over the city skyline and whispered her name. He didn't know it yet, but the greatest test of their love had only just begun. The river felt different the morning Ao left. It was calmer than usual, almost gentle, as if it didn't yet understand that she was saying goodbye. Mist hovered low over the water, wrapping the world in quiet, but Ao's chest was anything but calm. She stood in her canoe, paddle in hand, and took one last look at the shore she had known her whole life. The rock where Ethan used to sit, the bend in the river where she always cast her net first. The place where strength had kept her alive. She didn't cry. Tears were for endings that were final. This wasn't an ending. It was a choice. With a steady push, she guided the canoe forward and let the current carry her away. The new town was smaller, quieter in a different way. The river there was narrower, faster, less forgiving. Ao noticed that immediately. It demanded focus, punished mistakes. It reminded her of herself. She rented a tiny space near the water. Bare walls, a thin mat on the floor, nothing extra. It was enough. It had always been enough. From the first day, she worked harder than ever. She fished longer hours, pulled heavier nets, carried more crates. Her muscles ached each night, but the pain felt clean, honest. It drowned out the ache in her chest that came when the evenings grew too quiet. People in the new town stared too. Some whispered. Some laughed. Some were openly impressed. But no one knew her story. No one connected her to a billionaire or a storm or a promise that never settled. Here, she was just a fisherwoman again. And that was exactly what she needed. At night, when exhaustion dragged her into sleep, Ethan still found her. In dreams. Always standing by the river. Always looking at her the same way. Always about to speak. She woke up angry at herself for missing him. Ethan knew something was wrong the moment he returned. The city welcomed him with noise. Phones ringing. Assistants talking over one another. Screens flashing numbers that rose and fell with careless cruelty. Meetings dragged on for hours. Decisions piled up. But all of it felt distant. Empty. When he finally carved out time to return to the riverside town, his heart pounded with anticipation. He imagined her standing in her canoe, strong and steady, pretending she wasn't waiting. But the riverbank was quiet. Too quiet. No canoe.no nets drying in the sun.no familiar figure moving with calm purpose. Panic settled in his chest. He asked around. At first, people shrugged. Then someone said, "She left." Another added, "Didn't say where." Ethan stood at the edge of the river, staring at the water that had nearly taken his life and given it meaning. She wouldn't just disappear, he said aloud, but she had. Days turned into restless nights. Ethan searched. He drove through nearby towns, stopping at rivers, docks, markets. He showed her gloves to strangers, described her strength, her quiet eyes, the way she worked. Most people shook their heads. Some laughed. Some said he was foolish. Some told him to let it go. But Ethan had learned something important from Ao. You don't let go of what is real just because it's hard to hold. Weeks later, he found her. Not by luck, by persistence. She stood knee-deep in water, muscles taut as she pulled a heavy net toward shore. The river fought her fiercely, but she fought back harder, jaw clenched, breath controlled. She looked thinner, stronger, more guarded. Ethan stopped walking. For a moment, he just watched her, afraid that if he spoke too soon, she would vanish again. But then she sensed him. She always did. Ao turned slowly. Their eyes met. The world narrowed to that single moment. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice steady but cold. "I came to find you," Ethan replied simply. "You shouldn't have," she said. "But I did," he answered. She pulled the net onto the shore with a final, powerful tug and stepped out of the water. She didn't smile. She didn't look away. "You don't belong here," she said. "I didn't belong where I was either," he replied. She crossed her arms. "Did you finish saving your company?" "Yes," he said. "I always do." "And now?" she asked. "Now I'm here." "That's not an answer," she said. Ethan stepped closer. "You left without saying goodbye." "You left first," she replied. The words landed hard. He swallowed. "I came back. And I was gone," she said quietly. "Because I won't wait for someone whose life can pull them away from me whenever it wants." "I didn't know you would leave," he said. "I didn't know I would care this much," she replied. Silence wrapped around them, thick and heavy. Ethan spoke again, softer now. "I didn't come to pull you back into my world." "Good," she said, "because I won't go. I came to ask if I can be part of yours," he continued. Her breath caught, just slightly. "This life is hard," she said. "There's no comfort, no guarantees." "I know," he said. "I've had comfort all my life. It didn't save me." She looked away, staring at the water. "People will stare. They'll talk. They'll say you're pretending. They'll say I trapped you. I don't care what they say, Ethan replied. I care what you say. She laughed softly, without humor. Care doesn't stop disappointment. No, he admitted. But it makes it worth surviving. Ao turned back to him, conflict clear in her eyes. You almost drowned because you didn't understand the river, she said. I won't drown because I don't understand you. I'm not asking you to, he said. I'm asking you to let me learn. She studied him. The tension in his shoulders, the honesty in his voice, the way he didn't try to touch her or convince her with promises. You could leave again, she said. Yes, he said. I could. And I might not forgive you a second time, she warned. I won't ask you to, he replied. That answer unsettled her more than any promise could have. That night, Ethan didn't leave. He stayed in a small room nearby. He helped carry crates. He listened more than he spoke. He woke early and followed her to the river without stepping into her space. Then more days. He didn't rush her. He didn't pressure her. He didn't try to change her life. He simply showed up. Slowly, carefully, Ao felt the walls inside her loosen. Not fall, just soften. One evening, as the sun melted into the water, she finally spoke. You know I may never fit into your world, she said. Ethan looked at her. I stopped trying to fit into mine a long time ago. She watched the river, then nodded once. That wasn't forgiveness, but it was permission. And for Ethan, it was everything. The woman who walked away was still standing. And this time, she wasn't walking alone. Ao had never been afraid of storms, strong currents, or heavy nets. But the city made her nervous. She stood beside Ethan at the edge of the busy street, her fingers curling slightly into the strap of her worn bag as tall buildings stretched upward like they had something to prove. Cars moved too fast. People walked quickly, eyes forward, barely noticing anyone around them. This world felt loud, too polished, too sharp. You don't have to do this, Ethan said gently, noticing the tension in her shoulders. We can turn back. Ao shook her head. No. If I'm coming with you, then I need to see all of you. Not just the quiet parts. His chest warmed at her words. That was how Ao loved, fully or not at all. Ethan's parents lived in a calm part of the city, far from the noise. Their home was large but warm, filled with soft light and wide windows. When the car stopped in front of the gate, Ao hesitated. This place looks like it belongs to people who know which fork to use, she muttered. Ethan smiled. They know how to use kindness. That's the important part. Still, when the door opened and Ethan's mother stepped out, Ao straightened instinctively. She was elegant, calm, and welcoming, her eyes warm rather than critical. So this is Ao, she said, smiling. I've been waiting to meet you. Waiting, not judging. That single word loosened something tight inside Ao. Ethan's father followed closely, his posture relaxed, his expression curious rather than suspicious. He shook Ao's hand firmly, meeting her eyes with respect. It's nice to finally put a face to the woman who made our son forget his phone exists, he said with a chuckle. Ao blinked, surprised. Inside the house, nothing felt like a test. They asked her about the river, about fishing, about how she learned to be so strong. No one asked her why she wasn't softer, and no one hinted that she didn't belong. When Ethan's mother noticed the calluses on Ao's hands, she didn't flinch. She held them gently. These hands have worked hard, she said. You should be proud of them. Ao swallowed. No one had ever said that to her before. During lunch, Ethan watched quietly as his parents laughed with Ao, genuinely interested in her stories. He saw the way his mother nodded thoughtfully when Ao spoke about independence, the way his father listened closely when she talked about the river's rules. At one point, Ethan's mother leaned back and smiled knowingly. You know, she said, looking between them, strength shows up in many ways, but the strongest people are usually the ones who don't need to prove it. Ao felt Ethan's hand brush hers under the table. Later, when Ethan stepped away to take a call, his parents stayed with Ao in the sitting room. His father spoke first. You should know something. Ao stiffened slightly. Our son has always carried the world on his shoulders, he continued. He learned early how to succeed, but not how to rest. His mother smiled softly. You give him that peace. Eo's voice came out quiet. I don't want to change him. Good, his mother replied. Because you haven't. You've revealed him. When Ethan returned, he found Eo standing by the window, looking out at the city skyline. Her reflection stared back at her. Strong, uncertain, real. You okay? He asked. She nodded. Your parents are good people. They already love you, he said. She turned to him, startled. You don't know that. I do, he replied confidently. They look at you the way they look at truth. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Ethan told Eo he wanted to show her something before they returned. He drove her out of the city, past traffic and lights, until the air grew quieter and the road opened up. They stopped at a cliff overlooking a wide stretch of water that glowed gold beneath the setting sun. It reminded her of the river, only larger, endless. They stepped out of the car, and Eo felt the breeze brush against her skin. The water below reflected the sky like a mirror. It's beautiful, she said softly. So are you, Ethan replied without thinking. She glanced at him, surprised, then looked back at the horizon. You're getting bold. I'm getting honest, he said. They stood in silence for a moment, the kind that felt full instead of empty. Eo, Ethan said quietly. She turned toward him. I spent most of my life believing I had to choose between success and meaning, he continued. Between who I was and who the world wanted me to be. She listened, her expression calm. You never asked me to be anything else, he said. You didn't care about my name, my money, or my future plans. You cared about whether I showed up. His voice tightened. And that changed me. Eo felt her heart begin to pound. Ethan took a slow breath, then stepped back slightly. Then, to her complete shock, he knelt. Right there, on the solid ground. Her breath caught sharply. I know I come from a different world, he said, his voice steady but emotional. And I know loving me means choosing uncertainty. She shook her head faintly. Ethan, I'm not asking you to leave the river, he continued. I'm not asking you to become someone else. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Not flashy, not overwhelming. Simple, elegant. I'm asking you to choose me, he said. The man who learned how to live because of you. The man who wants to stand beside you, not in front of you. Tears filled Eo's eyes, surprising her. I don't promise ease, he said softly. I promise honesty, effort, respect, and a love that won't try to shrink you. The box opened. Inside was a ring, strong, understated, beautiful in its simplicity. Eo's hands trembled. No one had ever knelt for her. No one had ever asked her to be chosen without conditions. She thought of the river, of walking away, of standing alone for so long. Then she looked at Ethan, the man who followed her without trying to lead her, who listened without trying to fix her, who loved her strength instead of fearing it. Yes, she whispered. Ethan's breath left him in a shaky laugh. Yes, yes, she said again, stronger now. I choose you. He stood quickly, slipping the ring onto her finger with careful hands. When he pulled her into his arms, Eo held him tightly. Not as a shield, not as a rescuer, but as an equal. They stood there as the sun disappeared, the water below darkening into deep blue. Two worlds, one choice, and a love strong enough to hold them both. The news traveled fast, faster than the river, faster than rumors, faster than doubt. Ethan Cole was getting married, and not to a model, not to a socialite, not to a woman shaped by magazines and expectations. He was marrying Eo, the fisherwoman with arms carved by labor, the woman who pulled a billionaire from a storm, the woman who walked away before she begged. Within days, headlines buzzed, messages poured in, and invitations became the most desired objects of the season. People whispered her name with curiosity, with disbelief, with admiration. Some still questioned it, but most were watching, waiting. The weeks leading up to the wedding felt unreal to Ao. She moved between two worlds now, quiet mornings by the river and elegant fittings in softly lit rooms. Designers spoke gently, careful not to overwhelm her. Still, she insisted on one thing. "I won't hide my arms," she said firmly. "No lace sleeves, that no covering, no apology." When Ethan saw her final dress, he said nothing at first. He just stared. It was simple, flowing, and strong, just like her. The fabric moved freely, the cut elegant without being fragile. Her arms were bare, powerful, honest. "You look like yourself," he said softly. "That's the point," she replied. Ethan prepared differently. There were no loud bachelor parties or empty celebrations. Instead, he spent time with his parents, listening to advice he had never truly heard before. "Marriage isn't about rescue," his father said. "It's about partnership." Ethan nodded. "I know," and he meant it. The wedding took place beside the water, not in a ballroom, not in a cathedral, but on a wide open space overlooking the river that raised her and the city that shaped him. White chairs lined the ground. Soft music floated in the air. The sky was clear, generous, glowing. Guests arrived in waves: business leaders, creatives, family, old friends, people who once doubted and those who always believed. They all waited. When the music shifted, a hush fell over the crowd. Ao appeared. She walked alone. No escort and no arm to lean on. Every step was steady. Her dress caught the sunlight. Her hair was simple, her face calm. She looked neither nervous nor uncertain. She looked ready. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Not mocking, not judgmental. Ethan forgot how to breathe. He stood at the front, heart racing, eyes fixed on the woman who had changed his understanding of strength. When she reached him, he smiled, the kind of smile that couldn't be rehearsed. The officiant spoke about partnership, respect, and choosing one another daily. Then it was time for vows. Ethan went first. "I once believed power meant control," he said, voice steady but emotional. "But you taught me that real power is presence. You didn't save me from the river. You saved me from myself." Ao listened, eyes shining. When it was her turn, she took a breath. "I was raised by water and work," she said quietly. "I learned early that if I wanted to survive, I had to stand alone. Then you came, not to lead me, not to fix me, but to walk beside me." Her voice grew stronger. "I choose you because you see me, not as a story, not as a symbol, as a woman." The moment the vows ended, the officiant smiled. "You may kiss." The crowd erupted in joy as Ethan kissed Ao. Soft, respectful, certain. Cheers filled the air. The reception was unlike anything the city had seen. There was elegance, yes, but also warmth. Laughter mixed with music. Children ran freely. Conversations felt real. Ao danced without worrying how she looked. Ethan laughed without checking the room. At one point, Ethan's mother took Ao's hands. "You didn't just marry our son," she said. "You expanded our family." Ao hugged her tightly. As the evening deepened, lights reflected across the water, shimmering like stars fallen to earth. Ethan raised a glass. "To the woman who taught me how to live," he said, and Ao raised hers. "To the man who never asked me to shrink." As the night quieted and guests slowly departed, Ao and Ethan stood alone by the water. "You know," Ao said thoughtfully, "people will keep watching us." Ethan smiled. "Let them." She slipped her hand into his. The ring felt solid, real. "What matters," she continued, "is that we know who we are." He kissed her forehead. Together, the river flowed on, steady and timeless. It had raised her. It had tested him. And now, it watched them begin a life not built on spectacle, but on choice, respect, and love strong enough to weather any storm. The first sign was exhaustion that felt different. Ao had always known tired, the kind that settled deep in her muscles after hours of pulling nets and fighting currents. But this was softer, heavier in a strange, quiet way. Her body felt slower, as if it was asking her to listen instead of push. When the doctor smiled and said, "You're pregnant," Ao went very still. Ethan laughed first. Not a loud laugh. A breathless one, like his chest had been holding something too tight and finally let go. He dropped into the chair beside her, eyes shining, and reached for her hand. "We're having a baby," he said, almost in disbelief. Ao nodded slowly. A baby. Something warm spread through her chest. Not fear, not doubt, but awe. She had pulled life from the river for years. Now life was growing inside her. The months that followed were gentle in ways Ao never expected. Ethan took the preparations seriously, almost too seriously. He read books, asked questions, and insisted on being part of everything. They walked through stores together, Ethan holding tiny clothes in his hands like they were made of glass. "Can you believe something this small will be ours?" he asked, staring at a pair of socks no bigger than his palm. Ao smiled. "She'll grow fast. Strength runs in the family." They laughed, but later, when they decorated the baby's room, Ao stood quietly in the doorway and watched Ethan work. He painted carefully, stepping back often to check if the color felt calm enough. He assembled furniture slowly, refusing help, determined to do it right. "This room should feel safe," he said. Like a promise." Ao placed her hand over her growing belly. "She'll feel it," she said softly, "even before she understands it." At night, Ethan rested his head against Ao's stomach, listening as if he could already hear their child's thoughts. Sometimes he talked about the river, about the city, about the kind of world he hoped she would grow into. Hoped she would grow into. Ao listened and felt something she had never felt before. Rooted. When the day finally came, it came suddenly. Pain rolled through Ao like a wave she couldn't outrun. The hospital room buzzed with movement, voices calm but urgent. Ethan never left her side. He held her hand, wiped her face, whispered encouragement when the pain made her breath catch. "You're doing amazing," he kept saying. Ao laughed through clenched teeth. "I don't feel amazing." "You are," he said firmly. "I've seen you fight rivers. This is no different." The labor was long. Her body worked hard, powerful and relentless. When exhaustion threatened to pull her under, Ao focused on her breathing, on the strength she had always trusted. She thought of the river not as an enemy, but as a guide. Push, rest, push again. Ethan stayed steady. When fear flickered across his face, he didn't let it stay. He stayed present, grounded, strong in the way Ao had taught him strength could be. And then, a cry filled the room. Sharp, clear, alive. Ao felt the world tilt as the baby was placed on her chest. She stared down, tears spilling freely now, as a tiny girl blinked up at her with dark lashes and unmistakable eyes. Ethan's eyes. "She has your eyes," Ao whispered. Ethan covered his mouth, overwhelmed. "She's perfect." They named her Mira, a name that meant wonder, because that's what she was. Weeks passed in a blur of soft mornings and sleepless nights. Ao learned a new kind of strength, the strength of gentleness, of patience, of holding something precious without squeezing too tightly. Ethan learned too. He rocked Mira to sleep, changed diapers with serious concentration, and smiled every time she wrapped her tiny fingers around his. The world slowed, and Ao realized something surprising. She had never felt more powerful. One early morning, when the sun was just beginning to rise, Ao wrapped Mira close to her chest and stepped outside. Ethan followed quietly. They drove in silence until the city faded and the sound of water returned. The river flowed as it always had, steady, endless, unchanged. Ao stepped onto the familiar ground, her feet sinking slightly into the earth. She breathed deeply. The river greeted her with its soft, constant song. Ethan stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders. "This is where it all began," he said quietly. Ao nodded. She gently adjusted Mira in her arms and took a step closer to the water. The baby stirred, her eyes opening slowly, reflecting the light of the morning. "This river raised me," Ao said. "It taught me how to survive." She looked down at her daughter, then back at the water. "But you," she whispered, brushing her finger against Myra's cheek. "You will be raised by love, Ethan swallowed, emotion thick in his throat. Ao dipped her fingers into the river and let the water run over them, then lightly touched Myra's tiny foot. Just a drop, just enough. A blessing. The river flowed on, carrying the moment with it. Ao stood tall, Ethan beside her, their daughter held safely between them. She was no longer just the woman the river raised. She was the woman who chose love, built a family, and returned, stronger than ever. And the river, timeless and knowing, welcomed them all. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to this channel and tell us where you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.